what would you just say, generally speaking, are some key factors that contribute to a strong and mutually beneficial partnership between organizations from your experience?
When we think about business partnerships, sometimes we separate those from like personal relationships, but really they're all the same. I don't think an internal relationship, external business relationship, or a personal relationship are all that different. And, if you can really understand that each side has value in the relationship, I think that's a great start.
The most important aspect of becoming a strong leader as a technical professional is for you to develop your confidence, or if you're leading others, help them to develop theirs. Another important aspect of being a strong leader in the AEC industry is to be able to build partnerships, whether it's partnering with a subconsultant, a municipality, a public or private organization. Partnerships are everything. In this episode, I have with me Jeff Bournamis. Jeff is a Senior Business Development Director at School of PE. He's had a lot of experience in this industry, and he's going to share some really important insights as to how you can get the most out of yourself as a leader and your team members by really focusing on coaching and confidence. He's going to give some great strategies, and he's also going to talk about how to build great partnerships between different entities that last and deliver value for all parties. This is an episode you're not going to want to miss. I'm Anthony Fasano, and this is the Civil Engineering CEO. First, before we dive in, a word from our sponsor. Are you putting off preparing for licensure? Waiting for life to slow down so you have time to prep? Months from now, you could find yourself still waiting for the right time. Or you could start preparing today with School of PE. Take the guesswork out of exam prep. With 93% pass rates, expert instructors, and a pass guarantee, you'll be walking into that exam fully prepared. Make the right choice today. Enroll now and save 32% with promo code EMI32 at schoolofpe.com. That's SCHOOL of PE.com. All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest onto the show for today. Jeff Bournamis is a Senior Director of Business Development at School of PE. Jeff, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO Show.
Thanks, Anthony. I appreciate you having me today.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. So why don't you start off by talking a little bit about your career journey to Senior Director of Business Development at School of PE and kind of give us an overview of the organization's history and mission.
Yeah, so long history, but I'll save the details. But just know, I've really been in sales since day one. Like even if you consider bartending sales to some extent, it's sort of a PhD in people when you're behind a bar. But I really grew up in the construction world where I spent almost 20 years in sales, doing really all kinds of various kind of career pathing, from entry level all the way to regional sales managers. The nice thing about that world is the clientele is, engineers, builders, general contractors, and that really prepared me for School of PE, where, I came here really to start this B2B business. And, 3 years later, we are at 200 plus clients, and we've helped almost 10,000 employees of these clients prepare for exams and pass. School of PE is it's such a great company. It was started over 20 years ago by PE. And, back then there wasn't a lot of resources to help you pass. And so his thought was, maybe I can create something that really gives back to the engineering community. And for about 17, 18 years of that, it was really built as an e-commerce engine. And then, like I said, over the last 3 years, I've been building a B2B engine with my team and everybody else. So really been a great journey to get to where I am today.
That's great. And, EMI has kind of recently partnered with School of PE because at EMI, we're big believers in professional development for engineering professionals, of course, getting that license, which is so important. And sometimes either gets overlooked. People aren't told enough about it. Young engineers, college students aren't made aware of the PE license and the process to get it. And if you aren't aware of it and you don't start early enough, it can really back you up in your career. So, we're excited to partner with School of PE to get the word out there more and get some more resources out there, which is really part of our mission as well. So we're excited about that. So Jeff, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of leadership today, innovation. And I want to start with this question around, innovation is a kind of a big trending topic for today, of course, in the AEC industry. How do you cultivate a culture of innovation within your team? Maybe you could talk about that. I know you lead a team there.
Yeah, first and foremost, I think culture is just a huge, huge thing in any industry, but in particular, people industries. And I would consider the engineering industry a people industry, right? It's people dealing with people to create projects and inevitably to help people, right? And so with the idea of that, I think it starts with you got to hire the right people, right? So to create a culture, you have to hire people to the culture you want to create. And you have to sort of make sure they align with that culture. For me in particular, I really like to look for somebody who's an overcomer. From the maybe the smallest of things in their life to the biggest, right? It doesn't really matter. I think if you hire people who are used to having difficulty, maybe that's getting cut in a sport, as simple as that, or maybe it's
Right.
something bigger. But I think having a history of being in the people business and then being able to overcome things to find some success is extremely important for me when I'm hiring anybody in the business development world, because it is difficult. And if you can't face difficulties with a positive attitude, it makes it difficult. So the other thing is, I think then you just have to train and coach constantly. Really, I mean, leadership and, even as it applies to a culture, I believe, is built on three things, right? You have to have competence in what you do. You have to have confidence and you have to have character. I think when you put those three things together and you can coach people, you can sort of get that competence factor and that confidence factor on them. And then you just get out of the way. So when you talk about innovation, I think when people get ready and they're to a point where, they don't need the assistance of the leader as much, I think you just get out of the way, right? You take what you taught them and let them formulate their own style and allow people to make mistakes. If you don't allow people to make mistakes, you can't really have a culture of innovation, because the best innovations come out of mistakes.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I mean, that last point, if you're trying to innovate, you're trying different things, which means it's probably not going to go smoothly in the beginning, or it may not go smoothly. And then you have to kind of adjust, recalibrate, try it a different way. And I do think that's important. We try to promote a culture like that at EMI, where we basically say, listen, if we make a mistake, it's important that we share it with everybody on the team, so next time we don't make the same mistake, as opposed to like making a mistake and then just kind of shuffling it under the carpet and then going forward, because it's only going to hurt us again. So I think,
Sure.
if you can promote that, people are more comfortable. They're willing to take some more risks, right? Because they know that if there's a mistake being made, we can kind of see it as a learning opportunity, you know, and build upon it. So I think that's important. And I really like what you said about the three C's. And I think the most difficult one there sometimes is the confidence factor, because you can hire competent people, right? They have a resume, they have a background, they have expertise, but it's hard to like teach people confidence. You almost have to like help them build it up in themselves,
Sure.
and, put them in a position to maybe get a win and build it up, and show them that they have the capabilities that maybe they don't believe that they have. But that can really unlock them once that confidence piece comes into it. And I think what Jeff said is something that technical professionals struggle with mightily, which is figuring out when you get out of the way, right? Because I know, speaking as an engineer, my career is going to start doing very technical stuff, reports, calculations, and then one day I'm going to have to give that to someone else and kind of, delegate it and step out of the way. It's very uncomfortable. It doesn't feel natural. So there is kind of that balancing act of, if I'm leading a team with Jeff on it, I can give him something, but I have some point have to kind of really let him do it. And, really can't be standing over his shoulder, so to speak. So I think that's kind of a really good recap. And I think the one thing that you've said a few times already today that I just want to really reinforce is people. You know, we're talking about leadership in the AEC industry. I know it's a very project driven world, but projects revolve around people. And there's a quote that I always love when we do our project management programs from Cornelius Fickner, which says the P in PM is as much about people management as it is about project management, which is totally true. I mean, that's everything.
100%.
And I think a lot of the stuff so far already, just in the first few minutes that kind of Jeff alluded to, goes back to your ability to interact with people, right? Build them up, coach them, right? That's what leadership is. In a couple of words, you could say leadership is people, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's understanding people, right? It's understanding things. And sometimes it's understanding that they need to do it themselves, right? One of the hardest things as a leader that I've learned over time is you can't always save people from the mistake, meaning I might see one of our business development reps wanting to try something, right? Maybe it's something I've tried 10 times and it's never worked, right? But that's how I learned. And one of the hardest things to do as a leader is to allow them to make the mistake you could see coming so that then you can coach them on that mistake. The flip side of that is just because it didn't work for me doesn't mean it can't work for somebody else. And that is really difficult, especially if you have 20 plus years of experience doing something and the person you're coaching has 6 months. But I think it's just important to understand where they come from, and that overcoming kind of trait really is what builds their confidence. And so confidence is built out of overcoming and seeing that you can still do it. You can achieve regardless of the mistakes. That builds confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really the key. So, Jeff, if I were to kind of poll or talk to your team members and ask them to describe your leadership style in terms of driving growth, how do you think they describe it, or how would you hope they describe it?
Well, I hope, and I do think, because one of the things, maybe I'll start with that, is not being afraid to have honest conversations with your people, right? And being able to accept feedback, listen without replying. It's how somebody feels, right? Inevitably is feedback. And, and over the years, I've had various types of feedback. I've had negative feedback, and I've learned from it. And I've had positive feedback and asked, what did I do for you to feel so positively, so that then I know internally, okay, do more of that, right? But it's really the pillars that I like to follow, which are, one is lead from the back, right? Encourage people to act, right? I think if you encourage people to act by being in the boat rowing with them, everybody has seen that photo where it's like manager is guy yelling at his team to row and leader is the one sitting in the boat rowing with them. I really try to do that, right? I'm not going to ask anybody to do anything I wouldn't do or haven't already done before. So that's first. Second, I think you got to model what you want them to do. So you can't be afraid to get your own hands dirty just because you're a leader. And one of the things that was great at School of PE is I had to develop the proof of concept myself. So I had to prove that what I thought could work would work before I hired anybody. But once I hired them, I had the credibility. And then I think you empower them, but you also coach them. We talked a little bit about that earlier, Anthony, is that you got to really give people empowerment, but that's not to say completely hands off, right? You're still a coach, you're still a leader, and you're still trying to move the organization forward. You build trust, you got to have their back and you got to do what you say. And then finally, I use metrics to push the growth. So we have certain KPIs that we follow, and we follow them. I do one-on-ones twice a month with my team, and we go through the metrics. And most of the metrics that I like to go through are leading indicators, not lagging. And so you develop whatever leading indicators you need for growth, and the growth generally happens.
Yeah, I love the pillars, and we can explore them a little bit, but I want to just touch on that last point real quickly, that Jeff made, which is really important. This idea of like these leading versus lagging indicators, because a lot of times leaders have these KPI sheets, all these metrics, but they're lagging, right? Like, you know, maybe like for example, how many sales did we make this month? As opposed to maybe like how many sales calls did we have or how many leads did we generate, right? So like
Right.
you want to stay out ahead of things before it's too late. Because if you're just looking at the metrics after the fact, it may be too late to course correct, right? So, a good idea is to have a set of kind of leading and lagging indicators that you can monitor, which is great. And what I love about kind of Jeff's approach here is, he's got that idea of rowing in the boat with your team, which is awesome, and modeling, being that great example and empowering them. And then you also have the metrics. So there's kind of a good balance, right? Like we're going to let you do this, we're going to empower you, but we're going to have some accountability built in on the back end to make sure that we're headed in the right direction. And I think the running thread through all of that, and I feel like it's been a little bit of a running thread through our conversation so far, as the coaching, right? And I think that's so important. I think we do have to delegate, we do have to empower, and I know technical professionals struggle with those things, but that doesn't mean like you're walking away and like throwing people to the wolves, is what I like to say,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It means you still need to be there because you are the leader and you have the leadership experience that they don't have. And I think your coaching of them is where you have the ability to help them build up their confidence, which is what we kind of both talked about earlier as being one of the keys. So, if you see them in a meeting do something really well or do something they could do better, you can coach them on it afterwards, either way. And that's going to help them. Every little coaching, I think, conversation has an ability to drive that confidence up a little bit more until they really have a lot of momentum. And hopefully in doing that, you're also modeling the way that they're going to start coaching their team members as they step into that next level of leadership, which is how I think the whole organization grows.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I've achieved enough in my career that my legacy is what I'm passing on to my team. Right. And I have a lot of young folks on my team who this is really their first big sales job. And, one of the things I always think about is 20 years from now, 25 years from now, when they're in the position that I'm in, do they go, man, a couple of those things that guy taught me 20 years ago, he was right. You sort of just hope that like you're teaching people and then one day they see how positive that was and are able to use it in their own careers.
Yeah, it's really rewarding for sure. I mean, at EMI, our values are kind of give, guide, grow. We show up every day, we give our all, we're guiding each other. And if we do those things, we're growing. And kind of our main principle is like, how do we unlock growth? Which I think is great because you could say, like, how do we unlock growth with our programs for our clients? How do we unlock growth in our team members? And it's kind of what you just said really reminds me of that because you're like, I passed something along to that person. I've kind of unlocked a little bit of growth in them. And it's really powerful to be able to see that. And again, hopefully lead them down the path of being able to do the same.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about partnerships. I mean, that's really your specialty. You've spent a lot of your career building very powerful partnerships between organizations, between teams, in a lot of different ways. We're going to talk a little bit specifically about what School of PE has been able to do with some civil firms. But before we get into that, what would you just say, generally speaking, are some key factors that contribute to a strong and mutually beneficial partnership between organizations from your experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when we think about business partnerships, sometimes we separate those from like personal relationships, but really they're all the same. I don't think an internal relationship, external business relationship, or a personal relationship are all that different. And, if you can really understand that each side has value in the relationship, I think that's a great start. It's never always one side's giving 99% and one side's giving 1%, right? And even in business, yes, there's a lot of things I've learned from the partnerships that I've been in. So even if the knowledge that I've learned can be used to help other firms, then that's a huge value. And just understanding that you don't know everything. Then I think you do what you say you're going to do, right? If you can't do what you say you're going to do, then no partnership will last very long. And then finally, I think kindness and flexibility are very important. Think if you always approach, your business relationships with really a kind heart, with kind words, kindness, understanding, uh, you really can't go wrong. Doesn't mean it'll always work, but it's the great foundation to build it on. And then have flexibility. Don't be so rigid in what you do that you lose sight of you being there for the customer. I think those things really make for good partnerships in business.
Yeah, I think those are great. I mean, I think that last part about like having that kind approach to people, I think is important because you know what? Not every business relationship is going to work out, but I always want the person to look back and say, Anthony was a great person to work with. Didn't work out from a business perspective, but because you do have that relationship that you want to carry forward, and again, it's part of your legacy, like you mentioned before, what people think about you and the way that you work, and if you're going to do what you say you're going to do, which is one of the things you said, which is important. And I think the value aspect is important. I think for engineers listening to this, one way that this is going to show for them is partnerships a lot of times with other consulting firms or organizations. If you have a sub consultant, right, maybe you're partnering with a municipality on a project. And I think when you think about that, you need to think about the value that each of these partners brings to the table for the kind of the greater good of the initiative as a whole. And I think if you approach it that way and you're bringing your value to the table and they're bringing theirs, you're going to have a successful partnership. And if one partner doesn't have that value, it's probably going to surface. You have to talk through it and see what's going on there. And maybe that's when the partnership isn't good anymore. Maybe you just have to make some adjustments. But I think if you're ensuring that they're value driven, you can come at them with kindness and respect, you're going to win 9 times out of 10. And win doesn't always mean the relationship lasts forever, but it just means you have kind of good results and a good ending with that other partner, from my experience.
Yeah, and Anthony, one thing I really try to teach and talk to with my team is that even in the worst kind of exchange you might have where somebody's rude to you, at the end of the day, they might just be having a bad day. And how you act will potentially determine maybe a year from now, like they're looking for a partner. If they're like, man, I was really a jerk in that moment and they handled it with such class, maybe you're the first call they make. So you've always got to be forward thinking in that as well. And if you just act kindness with pretty much anybody you talk to in business, I think that comes back to you in spades.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a great point. In fact, when I was in coaching school, we spent a lot of time on this. And the takeaway, and what I remember from the teacher was, the way you respond to people is like a magnet, right? So if Jeff is like, hey, I don't want to work with you anymore, and I go back at him in an angry way, he's going to get angrier. But if I go back and say, hey, Jeff, no worries, maybe it's not the time right now. We'll keep in touch. We'll connect later. He's going to come back and say, oh, yeah, it's great. And he's going to have that good rapport. So like you can really set the tone. And this happens at home too, right? Like something happens with your spouse or your kids. If you yell at them and get angry, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to shut down. But if you're like, hey, it didn't work out well this time, maybe we could do it better next time, they're going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll try to do it better next time, right? So I think the idea of a magnet is a good way to think about it, with your team members, with your clients, with your personal relationships. And like Jeff said, you never know when the next year they're going to come back. And this happened to us several times at EMI where we talked to a prospective client. It wasn't the right time for them. It didn't work out. Maybe I went through a long sales process and then it didn't work out. But I was like, you know what? We had a good conversation. We started building a relationship. Maybe we'll hear back from them in the future. Maybe we'll get to work together in the future. Keep us in mind. And sure enough, they call us back in a year.
Yeah.
Hey, we've grown a bit. Now we need your help. And so I think it goes back to what you said earlier about, having kindness and respect for people. Like it's never a bad approach, like it always really works out well because at the end of the day, even if you're not winning a project per se, if you want to, not just thinking about it from a business perspective, but you want to go through your career having good relationships and good experiences.
Sure.
I mean, right. That's part of this career satisfaction. So I think
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here is just good for everything you do.
Yeah. And Anthony, when you do it the opposite way, which I think everybody has, right? Like I've certainly have. I've made mistakes as a leader. You do see what the end result of that is, right? And if you can't learn from it and grow, then maybe you're not meant to be a leader. But I think the best leaders are made, right? And you have to first be given a leadership position, but you have to, like we talked about in the beginning, you have to be allowed to sort of find your way. And that's going to happen with mistakes, and leaders will make mistakes. It's really their manager's job, their leader's job to coach them up and make them a better leader too. And those are just some of the things I've learned both personally and professionally that work.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll say about that, and really just some takeaway from everything Jeff said so far, is sometimes people don't know they're leaders, right? But maybe they are. And as a leader, you can coach them up to build that confidence to get them there. I had someone that works here at EMI who started about 18 months ago and said, just so you know, I'm not a leader. I can't manage people. I'm more of like a tech person. Well, now she's leading one of our most successful teams with a couple of people. And, we challenged her. We saw some leadership in her, but we did a lot of coaching with her. And now, if you looked at her, you would be like, hey, this person is an amazing leader, right? So my point is like, I don't think you can't give up on people based on what they're telling you. Like if you have a gut feel that this person has leadership abilities. And I think to Jeff's point of a lot of stuff we talked about today is it's the idea of coaching, having open conversations with people, maybe sometimes challenging them a little bit, but sticking with them. And because the worst thing that can happen is the person doesn't really take the next step in their career because you weren't like coaching them up for it.
Right.
And that's a big part of leadership. So Jeff, how have you seen your partnerships at School of PE solve some common challenges for civil engineering firms? Just to give us some examples.
Yeah, I think there's really three different ways that I've seen our programs help others. And a lot of this goes to that kind of valuing what other people are telling you piece of this is, we hear all the time, we're having trouble recruiting engineers. We're having trouble retaining engineers. And one of the things that our programs have been able to do for folks is help them with recruitment and retention. Because if you just think about like as simple as I'm helping you advance your career, that in itself makes people happy.
Oh, yeah.
And a happy employee generally stays. But when it gets into a recruiting world, think about I'm trying to recruit a young engineer, and I'm offering the benefit of helping you get licensed while you're with our firm. And the other firm, maybe they're paying a little bit more, but it's like everything's on your own. Where would you rather go? I think you want to go where it looks like people, like the company values their people. And this is a benefit no different than sitting down and telling them about your medical benefits, right? It's like, hey, we also have this other great benefit where we're going to help you get your licensure and help your career path journey. Second thing I would say is, without a doubt, it increases the number of licensed engineers at the firm. And so, this is anecdotal because I don't want to get into what maybe specific firms and who they are have told me. But what you find is people are hesitant to kind of announce that they're wanting to go get licensed, right? It's like this like thing inside of them. What if I don't pass? Then I got to tell. And there is a lot of that angst inside of folks when they're deciding, and in particular deciding, do I pay for a course to help me? And so when our partners start, offering this benefit to their employees, they see more and more hands go up, which in turn makes more and more people get licensed, which is a huge benefit to the firm. And then finally, we see it all the time, right? The biggest thing that in particular, those younger generations are requiring of employers is that they provide the training. There's sort of an old school mentality out there where it's like, I did it on my own, they can do it on their own. but that's just not the real world of the young folks in our organization. Like they're used to people providing them training. They want you to provide them training, and this would be no different than any other kind of training or benefits that you're offering.
Yeah, I mean, great points. I mean, first of all, recruiting and retention is the number one challenge for all AEC firms right now. I mean, we work with firms every day. We do leadership training, PM training, and we take the same approach as you in that. And I know this for a fact because over the last 2 years, I surveyed a bunch of people on LinkedIn. I think between the two surveys, it was like 900 engineers on my LinkedIn. And I asked them like what was the most important aspect of their company and why they would work at a company. Bonuses, healthcare packages, salary, career development growth. And career development growth was number one, over 50% of those people. And I think we live in a world where people want to grow, like they want to grow themselves. And most civil engineering firms today are doing well. I know that's a general kind of stereotype, but it's true because of funding and the economy and everything that's going on, which means they have a lot of options, these professionals. And if they have a lot of options and they can get a decent salary from 10 different companies, they're going to look for the company that's going to support their growth, right? How can I get licensed? How can I develop as a project manager? How can I become a better leader? And so programs like this are a huge recruiting benefit when you're sitting across the table from a candidate and you can explain to them how you're going to help them in their career, not just, give them a paycheck, right? I think that's really important. I think the second thing that you mentioned is also very important and probably something that maybe leaders listening to this show aren't as familiar with as you are because of your experience with the PE exam. And I am because I took the PE exam and, as a young engineer, which is people being timid, people being afraid to put themselves on the line and say, I'm taking this exam in 3 months or 6 months, and being afraid that they're not going to pass it. And, there's a big, and when you're young in a company, you're trying to make a name for yourself. You don't want to make a misstep. And saying, hey, I'm taking a day off, I'm going to take this test, et cetera, maybe having the confidence to ask your company to support you financially in it, right? You're kind of putting all your chips in the middle of the table. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But again, it goes back to what you said and what you said earlier about culture is if you set the culture as, hey, we promote PE licensure and we're going to get behind you 100%. We have programs to help you do that. It totally shifts that mindset, right? And it becomes a normal part of what you expect them to do and what you're going to help them to do. Just like if you're telling them we have a PM training program that we expect you to go through, right? So that's a really important part of it. And, I think doing that is something that is so important for companies to do because you need to set that standard and let people know that it's not like you hit or miss, you pass or fail, and then you're like out of here. That's not the deal. It's like, we're going to help you get licensed and we're going to stand behind you to do it. And I think that can really change the game from a cultural perspective for people.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think we've seen a lot of engineering firms' policies change by what we've presented to them, right? Where it's maybe the policy started as, hey, yeah, we're going to support it. We're going to reimburse them for all their costs once they pass the exam, which is a little different than, hey, we have a partnership with School of PE where we're going to provide you the way to pass the exam. It takes a lot of that kind of timid, maybe a little bit of a lack of confidence. It takes all that off the table, because you are now providing the course to them as a benefit to help their career. And I also think that it makes them a little more engaged in it, a little more accountable to it. And the passing is at a high rate. And so, I think that's important to think about as well, is just, where do we stand today, and what kind of training can we actually provide them that will help their careers versus like still go do everything on your own, but if you pass, we'll reimburse everything. That's a kind of different thing.
Yeah. One last point I want to make on that is I had a company reach out to me recently and say, hey, we kind of been in the habit of telling our employees to do their developmental stuff on their own time. Like, what are your thoughts on that? My thoughts on it are it's not a good approach because, think about it this way. Today, professionals are very maxed out. right? Leveraged out. They got people texting them, emailing them 24/7, projects, calls. They have families. So when are you telling them on their own time to study or like, go do PM training in our case, right? It's very difficult. So my point is that you have to maybe allow some time for them to prepare or do some of this training during their workday or midday or something like that, or just have some kind of like real agreement with them, like, hey, we'll pay for the course. The course is going to happen at night during the week, one night a week. Hopefully you're okay with that and have a conversation around it. But I think just to blankly say, go do it on your own time is not a supportive way to approach career development. I think you can say, listen, some of the stuff you may have to do on your own time, we'll pay for the course. Some of the stuff you may be able to do here in work, maybe you have a support group with other colleagues here that you could spend a half an hour a week on or something like that. So I just think when you approach it, you have to think about the whole person and understand that they have families, they have other responsibilities, and you want to support them. And whether it's meeting them halfway or having a plan in place, you can't just say, go do it on your own anymore. I just don't think that's a good approach.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to the things we talked about with leadership, right? It's also just understanding that their world is maybe different than yours. Their world maybe is busier than yours. And we've had several firms tell us something that really works is they'll have study groups where once a week they bring lunch in and they allow them to have like a study group session around their exam prep. Maybe they're all PE, civil, construction, right? And you get a group of 8 of them together because as they go through the course that week, each of them might be, strong in certain areas or weak in certain areas, and they can feed off each other and help each other. But it is on company time and on the company's dime, right? Because they're going to bring in lunch and allow these study groups to happen. And the ones who have done that have seen success. And then, of course, we have our own types of study groups and different things that we can organize as part of our partnerships that can help folks as well.
So, Jeff, one last thing I want to ask you about is, a lot of the firms that may be watching this, they have their own professional development programs and things going on, right? So how can they look to integrate other professional development, external resources like a school of PE or EMI programs? What advice can you share from what you've seen on integration?
So, yeah, I mean, one nice thing I would say about our program that helps them integrate it is that we have a comprehensive administrative portal, right? So you can take that administrative portal and add it into your LMS via single sign-on. So I think that's nice. And then, you have oversight of it. But I think it's important to look for companies that make it easy to do, to do this, right? That are easy to do business with. And that's the model that I've tried to build is we're going to be easy to do business with. We're going to provide so much support to the customer that it'll help them without a doubt integrate things into their company. And then secondly, I think integrating it into your culture. And the way you do this isn't just another training resource. This is a benefit. Right? It is a benefit like 401k. It's a benefit like health benefits. And when you hire somebody and you open that folder to go through all your benefits with them, this is something you tell them about. And I think as a culture, then it's now you really are showing, hey, we do have a people culture. We care about you, your career pathing and all that. There is flip side. There's a bit of a fear of, well, what if we train them up and then they leave? Well, then they do, right? But like at the end of the day, I think it's the opposite result, right? The more you pour into somebody, the more they're going to pour into you. And I think culturally, one of the easiest ways to bring a training program in is to create it as a benefit and to really make it part of your culture.
Yeah, and I like the response to that. What if we train them up and they leave? The response is, what if you don't train them up and they stay?
Yeah,
right.
That's the old theory, right? It's the old. You see that line all the time in leadership books, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
It is
it,
true, right?
it is true. It is true.
There's a cost to not training that's bigger than the upfront cost of providing training.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of summarize what Jeff said there, and I've had the same experience at EMI, is you need to look for external professional development partners that can blend into what you're doing, right? So that's not like another thing your people need to do, another thing that they're looking at. You can kind of fit it into your portfolio. So just an example of this, like at EMI, we do have PM training, our PM course, but we can certainly customize it to your company, right? Colors, everything. So it fits in, right? Because you want, if people start getting pulled in a lot of different directions, they got to log into a bunch of different things, they're not going to do stuff, right? So I think a part of it is, to Jeff's point, is find a partner that can work with you to integrate some professional development. They probably have really good content that you don't have, so you need it, but can they help you integrate it in a way that is that kind of seamless with your organization? And that will likely create a win-win situation. And going back to what Jeff said earlier, like a partnership that can provide a lot of value, right, to your, ultimately to your professionals. And really at the end of the day, I guess to kind of wrap up here, is professional development, I always tell our clients, is most important thing you could do. Why? Because it helps you recruit, like Jeff said. It's a great benefit. It helps you develop people. Like, wouldn't you want to develop everyone within your organization? And if you do those things, you're likely going to retain them, right? Because they are seeing growth in themselves. So why would they want to go somewhere else and risk the idea of not growing when they're growing here? So it just kind of solves a lot of the major problems in today's industry, which is why you really should focus on it. So, Jeff, I guess my final question can be, what maybe final piece of advice can you offer to, AEC leaders out there that are looking to leverage training, learning, and development to really drive career growth for their employees?
I would say two things as a final piece is stay open-minded. First and foremost, just because it got you here doesn't mean it's going to get you there. And I think that's always an important statement to evaluate your company, your training programs, your culture, whatever that is. Because the second piece is it's culture. What kind of culture do you have? I think if there's a fear of people leaving, then I think be open-minded to maybe we do need to look at some things within our culture. And if your culture's strong, people will stay. And I think those two things are the two things I would advise any business. Stay open-minded and make sure your people culture is very strong.
That's great stuff. All right, Jeff Bournamis, Senior Director of Business Development at School of PE. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today on the Civil Engineering CEO.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jeff. A lot of stuff to unpack there on leadership development, and professional development in your organization. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.